The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden stripes across the office floor. It was just another Tuesday, or so I thought, until I noticed the nameplate on her desk had changed. It was subtle, just a single letter altered, but it caught my attention like a whisper in a quiet room. Sarah was now Sarah, no H in sight. At first, I assumed it was a typo, a clerical error someone in HR would eventually correct. But as the days passed, the name stayed, and so did the quiet mystery surrounding it. There was something about Sarah that had always intrigued me. She was warm, always quick with a smile, but there was a distance in her eyes, as if she carried a secret just beneath the surface. We worked closely, sharing coffee breaks and the occasional lunch, yet I never felt like I truly knew her. And then, one afternoon, I stumbled upon the truth in the most unexpected way. It happened in the break room, of all places. I reached for a paper towel just as she dropped her phone, the screen lighting up with a notification. A name flashed across the display, one I didn't recognize, followed by a message that made my breath catch. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Emily." Emily? That wasn't her name. Not here, not anywhere I'd ever known her. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a nickname? A mistake? But the way she quickly snatched up the phone, the flush creeping up her neck, told me everything I needed to know. This was no accident. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I didn't ask. Instead, I watched, piecing together fragments of a life she kept carefully hidden. The way she hesitated before answering personal questions, the second phone she thought no one noticed tucked in her bag. And then, one evening after work, I saw them together, Sarah and a man I didn't recognize, walking hand in hand through the park. She was laughing, her guard completely down, a version of herself I'd never seen at the office. It was then I realized, Sarah wasn't just living a double life, she was living fully in one of them, while the other was merely a shadow. The revelation left me with more questions than answers. Why the alias? Was it fear, necessity, or something else entirely? I wrestled with whether to confront her, to ask for the truth, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she seemed lighter outside of work, unburdened. Or maybe it was the understanding that we all wear masks in one way or another, hiding parts of ourselves to fit in, to survive. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself reflecting on the nature of identity. How much of who we are is tied to the names we're given, the roles we play? Sarah or Emily was a reminder that people are never just one thing. We are layers, stories folded into stories, and sometimes, the most compelling chapters are the ones we keep closed. Then, one morning, she was gone. No notice, no farewell, just an empty desk and a lingering mystery. I never got the chance to ask her why, to hear her side of the story. But in her absence, I realized something profound. The truth isn't always about uncovering secrets. Sometimes, it's about respecting them, about understanding that every person we meet is fighting a battle, carrying a weight, or living a truth we may never fully see. And so, I let it go. Not because I didn't care, but because some stories aren't ours to know. Life is full of unanswered questions, of people who drift in and out of our lives like chapters in a book we'll never finish. But each one leaves a mark, a lesson, a quiet reminder that the world is far more complex and beautiful than we often give it credit for. As I sit here now, the sun rising once more, I think of Sarah or Emily wherever she is. I hope she's happy, I hope she's free, and most of all, I hope she knows that even in her absence, she taught me something invaluable, that kindness begins with understanding, and understanding begins with letting go. So here's to the mysteries we never solve, the people we never fully know, and the grace of accepting that some things are simply not ours to uncover. May we move through life with open hearts, leaving room for the stories we may never hear, and finding peace in the beauty of the unknown. The world is brighter when we choose compassion over curiosity, when we honor the hidden struggles and silent victories of those around us. And in that space of acceptance, we find not just wisdom, but a deeper, truer connection to the humanity we all share. Remember, every person you meet is a story still being written. Handle with care, love without condition, and above all, let the mysteries of life inspire you rather than unsettle you. For in the end, it's not the answers that define us, it's the way we choose to live with the questions. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I moved through them like a ghost, replaying every moment, every word, searching for signs I must have missed. How could I have been so blind? The laughter we shared, the secrets we whispered, had they all been lies? Or had the truth been hidden in plain sight, woven so seamlessly into our bond that I couldn't see it until it was too late? I found myself standing in front of the cafe where we used to meet, the same one where we'd spend hours talking about nothing and everything. The smell of coffee and baked bread still hung in the air, unchanged, as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. I ordered my usual, out of habit, but the first sip tasted bitter. It wasn't the coffee, it was the memory of their smile across the table, the way their eyes crinkled when they laughed. Had that laughter ever been real? Or had it been a performance, a carefully crafted act to keep me close while they plotted behind my back? The betrayal didn't come all at once. It wasn't a single shattering moment, but a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled loose from a sweater until the whole thing fell apart. First, it was the small things: missed calls, vague answers, a distance in their voice that I told myself was just stress. Then, the excuses piled up, each one flimsier than the last. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them because the alternative was unthinkable. But the truth has a way of forcing itself to the surface, no matter how hard you try to bury it. It was an email, left open on their laptop when they stepped away for just a moment. A name I didn't recognize, a tone too familiar. My hands shook as I read, the words blurring together and then snapping into sharp, painful focus. Plans made without me. Secrets kept from me. Laughter not with me, but about me. I closed the laptop before they returned, my stomach twisting into knots. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand an explanation right then and there. But another part, the part that still clung to the illusion of what we had, whispered that maybe there was a reason. Maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe. The next few days were a test of endurance. I watched them closely, searching for cracks in the facade. They smiled at me, touched my arm, asked about my day, all the usual things. But now, every gesture felt calculated. Every word carried a double meaning. The warmth in their voice sounded rehearsed, the concern in their eyes too perfectly timed. And then, the final confirmation. A text, flashing on their phone when they left it face up on the table. A name I now knew too well. A message that left no room for doubt. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, heavy with everything I now knew and they didn't realize I did. I studied their face, memorizing the curve of their smile, the way they tilted their head when they were thinking. I wondered if they could feel the shift, if some part of them sensed that the game was over. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, but inside, I was breaking. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just laid it out, piece by piece, watching their expression shift from confusion to shock to something almost like guilt, but not quite. They tried to explain, to justify, but the words rang hollow. The trust between us was already shattered. No apology could glue it back together. The hardest part wasn't the lies. It wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that the person I thought I knew, the person I had loved, had never really existed. They were a mirage, a beautiful illusion I had built up in my mind, and now that illusion was gone, leaving nothing but empty space where they had once been. I walked away that day, not with anger, but with a quiet, aching finality. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I learned how to exist in a world without them. It wasn't easy. Memories lurked in every corner, a song on the radio, a scent in the air, a phrase they used to say. But slowly, the sharp edges of the pain dulled. I stopped searching for their face in crowds. I stopped expecting their name to flash on my phone. And one day, without even realizing it, I woke up and didn't think of them at all. That's the thing about betrayal, it feels like the end of the world, until it isn't. Until you realize that the cracks they left behind are where the light gets in. That the person you become after is stronger, wiser, more careful with their heart, but still willing to love. Because in the end, their betrayal wasn't about me. It was about them, their choices, their flaws, and I refused to let their dishonesty define me. So I kept walking, one step at a time, away from the wreckage, towards something new. And that, more than anything, was my revenge. The betrayal settled into my bones like a slow-acting poison, seeping into the crevices of my mind where trust once lived. At first, I refused to believe it. There had to be an explanation, a misunderstanding, something that would make sense of the fragments of evidence I had stumbled upon. But the more I turned it over in my mind, the clearer it became there was no other interpretation. The truth was undeniable, no matter how much I wished it away. I had always prided myself on my ability to read people, to sense when something was off. Yet, this had slipped past me entirely. How long had it been going on? Weeks? Months? The thought made my stomach twist. Every shared laugh, every quiet moment of understanding, had any of it been real? Or had I been nothing more than a convenient presence, a placeholder in a story I didn't even know was being written behind my back? The details replayed in my mind like a broken record. The missed calls, the vague excuses, the sudden distance that I had chalked up to stress or work. I had given the benefit of the doubt, over and over, because the alternative that someone I loved could deceive me so effortlessly was unthinkable. But now, the evidence was there, undeniable in its cruelty. A message left open on a screen, a name I recognized but hadn't expected to see in that context. The words were casual, intimate, the kind of exchange that spoke of history, of secrets kept just beyond my line of sight. I sat with it for hours, motionless, as if stillness could somehow undo what I now knew. The room around me blurred, the sounds of the world muffled, as if I were underwater. Betrayal does that. It pulls the air from your lungs, replaces it with something heavier, something that makes every breath an effort. I wondered if I had missed signs earlier, if there had been moments when the mask slipped and I simply hadn't wanted to see it. The worst part wasn't even the act itself, it was the realization that the person I thought I knew didn't exist, or worse, that they did, and they had simply chosen to become someone else when I wasn't looking. The trust I had given so freely now felt like a weakness, a flaw in my judgment that had left me vulnerable. I questioned everything, every conversation, every promise, every quiet assurance that had once made me feel secure. Had any of it been genuine? I thought about confronting them. The words formed in my mind, sharp and precise, the kind of sentences that leave no room for deflection. But then I hesitated. What would it change? An explanation, an apology, would any of it undo what had been done? Or would it just be another layer of performance, another twist in a narrative I no longer recognized? So I waited. I let the silence stretch, not because I didn't have things to say, but because I needed to know what would happen if I didn't speak first. Would they sense the shift? Would they even care? The answer, when it came, was worse than I expected: indifference. Life continued as if nothing had changed, as if the foundation hadn't been ripped out from under me. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. The days that followed were a strange mix of numbness and hyper-awareness. I moved through routines mechanically, my mind elsewhere, dissecting every interaction, every glance, for clues I might have missed. I watched as they went about their days, effortless in their deceit, and wondered how many people in my life were capable of the same. If someone I had trusted so completely could do this, who else might? It's a particular kind of loneliness, realizing you've been betrayed. It isn't just the loss of the person, it's the loss of the version of yourself that believed in them. That version of me was gone now, replaced by someone more cautious, more guarded. I mourned that loss quietly, the way one mourns something they didn't realize was fragile until it shattered. Eventually, the anger came, not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder, quieter. It settled in my chest like a weight, a constant reminder of what had been taken from me. I didn't lash out, didn't demand answers. Instead, I let it fuel me, let it sharpen my focus. If trust was a liability, then I would rely on something else myself. I began to rebuild, piece by piece, without them. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the hurt resurfaced, when a memory or a familiar place would catch me off guard and I'd have to steady myself against the wave of emotion. But with time, the sharp edges dulled. The betrayal didn't disappear, it never really does, but it no longer defined me. And in the end, that was the lesson. Not that people will betray you, though some will. Not that love is fleeting, though sometimes it is. But that you survive it. That the pieces can be gathered again, rearranged into something new, something stronger. I don't know if I'll ever trust the same way again. Maybe that's the cost of knowing how deep the cuts can go. But I also know this: I won't let their choices harden me completely. Because the alternative, living without trust at all, is its own kind of betrayal. And I refuse to let them take that from me too. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I moved through them like a ghost, haunted by the weight of what had been done to me. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, it was in the silence that followed, the way the world kept turning as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, my trust lay in shattered pieces at my feet, sharp enough to cut me every time I tried to pick them up. I replayed the moments leading up to it, searching for clues I must have missed. Had there been a shift in their tone, a hesitation in their eyes? Or had I been so blind, so willing to believe in the goodness of the people I loved, that I ignored the signs? The worst part was realizing how easily I had been fooled. The laughter, the shared secrets, the quiet assurances, all of it had been a performance, and I had been the only one who didn't know the script. The anger came later, a slow burn that replaced the numbness. It wasn't the explosive fury I expected, but something colder, heavier. It settled in my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. How could they do this? Not just to me, but to everything we had built together? The memories I once cherished now felt tainted, as if they had never been real. Had any of it been genuine? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed lie, too naive to see the cracks in the foundation? I thought about confronting them. There were moments when I rehearsed the words in my head, sharp and precise, designed to make them feel even a fraction of the pain they had caused me. But then I would stop. What was the point? No apology could undo what had been done. No explanation could make me trust them again. The damage was irreversible. Instead, I withdrew. I stopped answering messages, avoided the places we used to go together. It wasn't just them I was avoiding, it was the reminders. The way every familiar street corner or song on the radio seemed to whisper their name. The world felt smaller, lonelier, as if the betrayal had carved out a space inside me that could never be filled again. Sleep became a battleground. In the daylight, I could distract myself, but at night, there was no escape. My mind replayed the betrayal on a loop, each time with a new detail I hadn't noticed before: the way they had avoided my gaze that last time we spoke, the half-finished sentences that should have been a warning. I would wake up exhausted, my heart pounding as if I had been running from something in my dreams. The worst part was the doubt that crept in. If they could betray me so easily, what did that say about me? Had I been too trusting? Too weak? Maybe I had given them the power to hurt me by believing in them too much. The questions gnawed at me, feeding the bitterness that was slowly taking root. I tried to distract myself with work, with hobbies, with anything that could fill the silence, but the emptiness followed me. It was in the way I hesitated before opening messages, the way I flinched at unexpected kindness, as if waiting for the catch. Betrayal didn't just steal my trust in them, it stole my trust in everything. Weeks passed, then months. The sharp edges of the pain dulled, but the scars remained. I learned to live with it, to carry the weight of what had happened without letting it crush me. But some nights, when the world was quiet, I would still lie awake and wonder how could something that once felt so real turn out to be nothing but an illusion. And then, one day, I saw them again. Not in person, but in a photograph, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't left me broken in their wake. That was when I realized the hardest truth of all. To them, I had never really mattered. The betrayal wasn't a tragedy, it was just another day. But for me, it changed everything. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It was slow, methodical, like the steady drip of water eroding stone. I should have seen it sooner, maybe I did, in fleeting moments when doubt flickered at the edges of my thoughts, but I chose to ignore it. Trust, once given, is hard to retract. And so, I let the cracks widen until the foundation crumbled beneath me. At first, it was small things. A missed call here, an unexplained absence there. Excuses piled up like leaves in autumn, brittle and easy to brush aside. I told myself life was busy, that people had their own struggles. But then the distance grew, not just in actions but in words. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now stuttered, strained by something unspoken. I could feel the shift, like the air before a storm, heavy with the promise of something inevitable. Then came the silence. Not the comfortable kind, the one shared between people who know each other so well that words aren't always necessary. No, this was different. It was the silence of withdrawal, of deliberate withholding. I reached out, and my words seemed to vanish into a void, unanswered, as if I were speaking to a ghost. The more I tried to bridge the gap, the wider it became, until I was left standing on the edge, staring into an abyss I didn't recognize. When the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't through confrontation or confession. It was an accident, a misplaced message, a slip of the tongue. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The person I had trusted, the one I had believed in, had been weaving a different story behind my back. It wasn't just neglect, it was deception, a calculated erosion of what I thought was real. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the aftermath. The way my mind replayed every moment, searching for clues I had missed, dissecting every word and gesture for hidden meaning. Had I been blind, or had I simply refused to see? The questions gnawed at me, relentless. Trust, once broken, doesn't just snap back into place. It leaves scars, invisible but deep, shaping the way you see the world afterward. I tried to rationalize it, to find some justification that would make it hurt less. Maybe they had their reasons. Maybe I had failed them in some way. But the truth was simpler, and far uglier. Sometimes, people choose themselves, even at the expense of others, and no amount of understanding can soften that blow. The days that followed were a haze of numbness and quiet fury. I withdrew, not out of spite, but out of necessity. There's a certain clarity that comes with heartbreak, a brutal honesty that strips away illusions. I had to relearn how to stand on my own, to trust my own judgment again. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger threatened to consume me, when the injustice of it all felt like a weight too heavy to carry. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sharp edges of the pain began to dull. Not because the betrayal mattered any less, but because I started to see it for what it was, a reflection of them, not of me. Their choices, their actions, were theirs alone. I couldn't control them, and I certainly couldn't undo them. All I could do was decide how to move forward. And so I did. Not with grand declarations or dramatic closures, but with quiet resolve. I rebuilt, piece by piece, the parts of myself that had been shaken. The trust I had lost in them, I redirected inward. If anything, the betrayal taught me this. Not everyone deserves the keys to your heart, and that's okay. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Now, when I look back, the sting is still there, but it's distant, like an old wound that aches only when the weather changes. I don't hate them. Hate would mean they still have power over me. Instead, I feel something closer to pity, because in the end, betrayal doesn't just hurt the betrayed, it corrodes the betrayer too. And while I've moved on, I wonder if they ever truly will. Life, I've learned, is too short to dwell in the ruins of broken trust. The world keeps turning, and so must we, not forgetting, but forgiving, not for them, but for ourselves. Because the greatest act of defiance isn't holding on to the pain, it's refusing to let it define you. And so, I walk forward, lighter now, though not unscarred. The past is a shadow, always there but no longer darkening my steps. And the future? Well, that's mine to shape on my own terms, this time. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and quiet devastation. I moved through my routines mechanically, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me like a physical force. Every familiar corner of my life now felt foreign, tainted by the knowledge that the person I had trusted most had chosen to deceive me. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the months, maybe even years, of careful concealment. How many times had I looked into their eyes and seen only warmth, completely oblivious to the lie beneath? At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a misunderstanding, some hidden context I wasn't seeing, but the evidence was undeniable, and the more I turned it over in my mind, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate choice, repeated over and over, each time chipping away at the foundation of what I thought we had built together. I replayed memories like a detective searching for clues I had missed. That time they canceled plans last minute, the strange defensiveness when I asked about certain messages, the way they sometimes seemed distant, lost in thought. At the time, I had dismissed it as stress or fatigue. Now, I wondered if every unexplained moment had been a thread in the larger tapestry of deceit. The hardest part wasn't even the anger, it was the grief. Grief for the version of them I had loved, the version that perhaps never really existed. I mourned the future I had imagined, the trust I had given so freely, the intimacy that now felt like a performance. There was a hollowness in my chest, a space where certainty had once lived. I thought about confronting them, rehearsing the words in my head, but each time, I stopped myself. What would it change? An explanation, an apology, would any of it undo what had been done? Or would it just be another layer of manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative? The more I considered it, the more I realized that silence was the only response that felt true. Some betrayals are too deep for words. Instead, I turned inward, sitting with the discomfort, allowing myself to feel the full weight of it. I didn't rush to forgive or forget. I didn't force myself to move on before I was ready. Betrayal isn't something you simply get over, it's something you absorb, metabolize, and eventually learn to carry. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and my mind wandered, I wondered if they ever felt guilt. Did they lie awake at night, haunted by what they had done? Or had they convinced themselves it was justified, that I would never find out, that the risk was worth it? The thought that they might not have cared at all was almost worse than the betrayal itself. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sharp edges of the pain began to dull. Not because the hurt had lessened, but because I was learning to live alongside it. I started to rebuild, not by erasing what had happened, but by accepting it as part of my story. I reminded myself that their choices were a reflection of them, not me. I had loved honestly, trusted openly, there was no shame in that. And then, one morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about them the night before. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was the first sign that I was healing. The world hadn't ended, even though it had felt like it would. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of joy. That's the thing about betrayal, it feels like an ending, but it's really just a brutal kind of beginning. The beginning of a deeper understanding of yourself, of what you will and won't tolerate, of the kind of love you truly deserve. And though the scars remain, they become part of you, reminders not of the pain, but of the resilience that followed. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust someone like that again. Maybe that's the cost of such a wound, a lingering wariness, a hesitation where there was once certainty. But I also know that closing myself off completely would mean letting them win twice. So I move forward, carrying the lessons but not the bitterness, choosing to believe that not everyone will betray me, even if one person did. The truth is, betrayal doesn't just reveal the other person, it reveals you. It shows you how much you can endure, how deeply you can feel, and how, despite everything, you can still choose to rise. And in the end, that's the only thing that really matters. The betrayal settled into my bones like a slow-acting poison, seeping into every crevice of my thoughts until I could no longer distinguish between what was real and what I had imagined. At first, I tried to rationalize it, maybe there was a misunderstanding, an explanation I hadn't considered. But the evidence was undeniable, laid out before me in stark clarity, and no amount of mental gymnastics could twist it into something less painful. I had trusted without reservation, believing in the unspoken pact between us that no matter what happened, we would at least be honest with each other. But that trust had been eroded, not in one catastrophic moment, but in a series of small, deliberate choices made behind my back. Each lie, each omission, was a crack in the foundation of what I thought we had built together. And now, standing in the wreckage, I wondered how I hadn't seen it sooner. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the way it made me question my own judgment. Had I been blind, naive, or had I simply wanted to believe in the version of them I had constructed in my mind, ignoring the inconsistencies that now seemed so glaring in hindsight? The mind has a way of smoothing over rough edges when it wants to, of filling in gaps with hope rather than suspicion. I replayed every interaction, every conversation, searching for the moment things had shifted. Was it something I had done? Something I hadn't done? But the more I turned it over, the more I realized that this wasn't about me at all. It was about them, their choices, their weaknesses, their inability to face whatever it was they were running from. And yet, knowing that didn't dull the sting. If anything, it made it worse. Because if it wasn't personal, then it meant they had betrayed me not out of passion or anger, but out of sheer carelessness. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and hollow routines. I moved through the world like a ghost, going through the motions without feeling any of it. People asked if I was okay, and I lied, because what else could I say? The truth was too heavy to put into words, too tangled to explain without unraveling completely. So I smiled and nodded and pretended that my world hadn't been upended. But in the quiet moments, when there was no one around to perform for, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I wondered if they ever thought about what they had done, if they felt even a fraction of the regret I carried for them, or had they already moved on, leaving me behind like a footnote in their story. Eventually, the anger came, a slow, simmering rage that burned away some of the numbness. It was easier to be angry than to grieve, easier to resent than to mourn what had been lost. Anger gave me a direction, a focus, but even that faded with time, leaving behind something quieter, something more resigned. I realized then that betrayal doesn't just break trust, it changes you. It rewires the way you see the world, the way you see other people. Once you've been blindsided, you can't unlearn that vulnerability. You become cautious, guarded, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And maybe that's the true cost of betrayal, not just the pain of the moment, but the way it lingers, shaping who you become long after the wounds have scarred over. I wish I could say I emerged stronger, wiser, better. But the truth is, I just became different. Not broken, but altered. And as much as I wanted to go back to the person I was before, I knew that wasn't possible. Some doors, once closed, can't be reopened. Some trust, once shattered, can't be rebuilt. So I carried it with me, this quiet understanding that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend, not every promise is meant to be kept. And though it made the world feel colder, it also made me more aware of the warmth when I found it the people who stayed, who proved themselves through actions rather than words. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe betrayal wasn't just an ending, but a brutal kind of refinement, a way of separating what was real from what was merely convenient. And as much as it hurt, I had to believe that one day, I would be grateful for the clarity, even if I wasn't there yet. For now, though, I just let myself feel it, the loss, the disappointment, the slow process of relearning how to trust. Because healing isn't linear, and some days, the wound feels just as fresh as it did at the beginning. But I keep moving forward, one step at a time, knowing that even this won't last forever. And maybe, in time, I'll find a way to forgive not for their sake, but for mine. Because holding on to bitterness is just another way of letting them win, and I refuse to give them that power over me. So I breathe, I let go, and I wait for the day when the memory of their betrayal no longer feels like a weight around my neck. Until then, I just keep going. The aftermath of betrayal is a strange place to exist. It's not just the initial shock, it's the way it lingers, coloring every interaction, every thought, long after the fact. I found myself second-guessing people who had given me no reason to doubt them, projecting my hurt onto those who didn't deserve it. It wasn't fair, but fairness had stopped being a priority the moment I realized how easily it could all be taken away. I tried to distract myself, threw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that would keep my mind from circling back to the same questions. But no matter how busy I kept, there was always a quiet moment where it all came rushing back. A song, a place, a phrase, something would trigger the memory, and I'd be right back in that moment of realization, feeling the ground fall out from under me all over again. I wondered if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted what they'd done, or if, in their mind, they'd already justified it, rewritten history to make themselves the hero of their own story. It was maddening, not knowing, not having closure. But closure, I was starting to realize, was a myth. There was no perfect explanation that would make it all make sense, no apology that would undo what had been done. So I stopped waiting for one. Instead, I focused on rebuilding not the relationship that was beyond repair but myself, my sense of worth, my ability to trust my own instincts again. It was slow work, like reassembling a shattered vase one tiny piece at a time. Some days, it felt impossible. Other days, I could almost convince myself I was whole again. And then there were the days when the anger returned, hot and sudden, catching me off guard. I'd be going about my day, perfectly fine, and then bam, a memory would hit, and I'd be furious all over again. Not just at them, but at myself. For trusting, for not seeing it coming, for being so easily discarded. But anger, I learned, was just grief in a different form. And grief couldn't be rushed. It had its own timeline, its own rules. The only way out was through. So I let myself feel it. All of it. The hurt, the rage, the sadness, the confusion. I stopped trying to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. I stopped minimizing what had happened, stopped telling myself I should be over it by now. Because the truth was, betrayal wasn't something you just got over. It was something you learned to live with. And slowly, imperceptibly, I did. The sharp edges of the pain dulled. The memories lost some of their power. I started to laugh again, to let people in again cautiously, carefully, but still. I stopped seeing their face in every stranger, stopped expecting every promise to be broken. Life moved on, as it always does. And one day, I realized I hadn't thought about them in weeks. That was the real victory, not forgetting, but no longer being defined by it. No longer letting their choices dictate my happiness. I'd survived, and in the end, that was enough.